We have been given minds that cannot know completely, but we've been given hearts that can love completely. And that is the way to approach what's coming for us in the next few years or a few months.
In today's busy world, how can we find the inspiration, knowledge, and energy to live a healthy and empowered life? If we balance and harmonize our mind, exercise our body, live according to the laws of nature, and connect to spirit, can we find a way to heal, become our authentic self, and live our purpose with love? I am your hostess, Amy Fournier, and welcome back to Awakening Aphrodite. Hey, I bet you work out. Yeah, I mean, you know I do, right? I mean, it's an essential component of a healthy lifestyle. But did you know that if you work out and if you sweat a lot and if you're stressed a lot and you do any kind of intermittent fasting or fasting at all, you might want to look into getting electrolytes into your diet. I have them every single day. It's the first thing I have in the morning, and there's one company that is definitely my favorite. Paleo Valley. You can get the complete benefits of trace minerals and electrolytes that are found in an unprocessed medium with ancient sea salt included, organic coconut water, and seaweed extract without any of the refined sugar or synthetic ingredients and chemicals that most electrolyte drinks have. So this is a great product. I love it. Check it out on my website, eStore. Enter the coupon code AmyFournier10 at checkout, and you can save 10%. And let me know what you think. Let's get to the wand.
So this is a handmade product that you have now in front of you. Into the wand, you find pure coherent water. And to make that water takes a year. That is put in the wand, and when you're using the wand and you put it into a glass of water, and then after 15 to 20 seconds, the whole glass is coherent.
Tell us about some of the feedback you're getting, because I know I felt different drinking it. Now, maybe you have to be tapped into the subtle energies. Maybe it's a catch-22. In order to feel it, you got to be more tapped in. But I know you're getting a lot of good feedback. People can tell the difference, right?
We get hundreds of feedback, really hundreds. Until now, what we heard from most of the people is they feel and they can even taste the difference.
Yes.
Some tests were done by people, they had multiple glasses of water and they could constantly say, this water is the best. We've seen the same test with animals.
It's like the Pepsi challenge. Between Coke and Pepsi, can you blindfold them. Can you tell the difference?
Yeah, but this time we did it with water.
The coherence challenge.
Coherence challenge, yes. But a lot of people feel that they sleep better, they feel more comfortable, they have more rest, they become more receptive, they want to walk in nature again. All those things.
If you want to purchase your own wand, which we highly recommend, you can get it on my website. I only put products I believe 100% used personally on mine. I couldn't get this on my website fast enough in my e-store to share with people, and you can even save 10%. You use the Amy coupon. It's on my website. Thank you for providing that, by the way. Welcome back to Awakening Aphrodite with Amy Fournier. This show is about helping you to be healthy and fit in mind, body, and spirit, as well as harmonize your masculine and feminine energy, tap into your intuition, your true source of power, and awaken your authentic self. My friend, are you biased? Do you have prejudices? How do you know what you know? How do you know what you know? How do you know something is true, something is real? Why do you believe what you believe? Why do you think the way you think? These are very important questions. Have you ever asked yourself these things? I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm not biased, right? Nobody thinks they're biased, but guess what? We all are. And we all, like it or not, have programming put there by, I don't know, pick somebody, right? Some adult probably that hopefully meant well, but yes, how many of our thoughts are actually originally our own? Very important questions. Today, my guest and I talk about these things and more. Dr. Madhava Setty is my guest today, and this is a thrilling, very thought-provoking, very deep episode. So first of all, I want to thank my buddy, my friend, my soul brother, Paul Check, for hooking me up with Madhava, because he reached out to me and said, you've got to get this guy on my show. He's a powerhouse and he's going to blow your mind and the mind of all your listeners and viewers. And I'm guessing Paul is usually pretty much always right. I think he's going to be right for sure. So Madhava is an only child of parents that immigrated to the United States from South India in 1965. He earned a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering from MIT, and he worked in the Aerospace and Defense Industries for 6 years. He participated in a research expedition to the polar ice cap founded by the Office of Naval Research. That experience at the top of the world completely changed his life. He was no longer willing to participate in any effort that wasn't directed in the alleviation of suffering on the planet. He received his medical education at Baylor College of Medicine in 1998 and training in anesthesiology at the University of Pennsylvania in 2002. He then became a diplomat of the American Board of Anesthesiology and has been in clinical practice since 2002. Closely observing thousands of patients under anesthesia led him to basically ask a very fundamental question around the ideas that have gone unchallenged for a very long time. Ideas such as, what does it mean to be awake? Does awareness require a functioning body, or does it arise of its own? These are all questions that we talk about in the episode today, because Madhava was astounded to realize that our understanding of who we are as conscious beings is based on assumptions, and assumptions that can easily be overturned nonetheless. However, this all requires the willingness to really be honest and take a hard look at our biases and prejudices. If you like this type of discussion, you probably would want to check out episode 148, The Origins of Life Force and the Feminine Energy, with the one and only Dr. Ibrahim Karim of Biogeometry. That's 148. Episode 184 on Destiny, Reincarnation, and Karma with Rudy Verspoor. That was a 3-part series, and 184 was the part on reincarnation. And episode 218, The World Beyond Perception, again with Dr. Ibrahim Karim. I also am so happy to share with you that Madhava has agreed to come back on the show for a part 2 because his book, Woke, was so amazing with so many important concepts and just such a deep dive on such pertinent topics. I asked him to come back to get to the million other questions I had for him, and I wanted to get his perspective. I know you're going to agree. This guy is absolutely brilliant, so articulate, so heart-centered, such a blessing to sit down and chat with him. And before we get to the episode, I just wanted to make sure that you were aware that I am taking on 1 or 2 more personal coaching clients. So if you're interested in working personally with me, go ahead and email me at amy@amyfournier.com. If you forget, or you're driving, or you're busy, whatever, all the information is on my website. You can send me an inquiry form about working on coaching together. And also, my new course, Goddess Rising, Thriving Through the 4 Stages of Womanhood, is going to be coming out in 2024. And if you want to get in the first group of women, please make sure you sign up on my email list so you'll be notified when we're taking applications and opening those doors. Super excited about that course. All right, let's now join part 1 with Dr. Madhava Setty. Welcome back to the show, everybody. Madhava, welcome, welcome, welcome to Awakening Aphrodite. It is an honor to have you on the show.
Thank you, Amy. I'm very delighted to be here with you.
Well, as everybody heard from your introduction, we are in for quite a treat, quite a ride today, everybody. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm putting on my seatbelt for this one, maybe my helmet too, because we're going to go deep and we're going to talk about some really important things. And we're going to put on our big girl pants, our big boy pants. And we're going to look at some things that maybe we just need to take a deep breath and take a look at and get real and get honest and get courageous. So before we dive into all that fun, would you mind explaining? I love your beautiful name. I understand your heritage a little bit, but does your name have a meaning? Because it sure is unique.
That's a very good question. My name, Madhava, is another name for the Hindu god Krishna.
Wow.
And it is kind of an antiquated name my parents gave me. And if I may, I just want to say 2 words about that. All
Please.
my life, I've always felt like, why do Indian parents always name their children after God? And I thought that was an enormous burden to carry. Those are pretty high standards. Um, and then only late in life did I understand the purpose of that, which was this: every time you call your child as a parent, you're actually calling in, the deity, whatever that might be. And for that reason, we during COVID we adopted, or we have a dog now, and we named her Satya, which means in Sanskrit truth. For that very reason, that was a time where I felt like that's what we should be calling in right now. And when I asked my son what he wanted to name the dog under those understandings, he said Chick-fil-A.
Out of the mouth of babes, right there.
That's
I
right.
love it. It could have been worse. It could have been a lot worse. That's fantastic. I am just a big believer in, we're spell casting the words we use. I've heard Laurel Arnica, who's just a brilliant woman. She's been on my show before. I don't know if you're familiar with her work. She calls herself the metaphysical mother goose of language. She's just brilliant. And she talks about how words are like software. And we're literally programming our cells and our mind and our body and that of others, by the actual words we use. And I'm sure you're familiar. The ancients knew that, in their chants, their prayers, the way they used frequencies. I mean, heck, they moved boulders and stuff with sound. I mean, it's nuts when you really look into it.
I'm 100% behind that. And as your audience probably knows, I'm an anesthesiologist. And I find myself speaking to people at very key moments in their life. And I'm shocked by how little care my colleagues and, the people around me take in their choices of words.
Yeah.
And it happens all the time. And I'm always trying to correct or advise my colleagues to maybe, say it differently. It's amazing how little care, especially what's shocking to me is people in the healthcare field don't consider how important their choice of words are.
I'm so glad you're saying that, because one of the many things I wanted to pick your brain about was, as an anesthesiologist, from what I've learned, the importance of what is being said while the patient is while the patient is unconscious, and what's being said in the operating room or whatever, and that going into the subconscious of the patient. And that can be either good or bad, right? When you're aware of it, you can actually help program this person to heal quicker, to everything's going beautifully, everything's wonderful. Or, if you're unlucky to get somebody that maybe isn't too conscious about it, and they're, maybe saying things that aren't so wonderful, and maybe we're getting ahead of it, or maybe we should just go right there, because we're going to talk about consciousness. And I know a big part of your work is, if consciousness requires a body, and requires physical sensation, how do we know we are conscious? Where's conscious located? And I know that's a big part of your work. Would you like to speak to that? We can just jump right in.
Sure. Yes, that might be a good place to start. You know, I ended up in medicine after another career, and I ended up in anesthesiology after abandoning another pursuit in medicine. And nevertheless, I found myself in an operating room for the first time as a resident in anesthesia at the University of Pennsylvania. And I am told exactly what doctors in training hear from their mentors on the first day of anesthesia training. And what they say is, they look over at a device called a vaporizer. A vaporizer is something that allows you to mix a very precise amount of the anesthetic into the inhaled gases which your patient is breathing. And they indicate, look, Madhava, if you can figure out how that works, meaning the anesthetic gases, you will win the Nobel Prize. And this is something that's still being said today and had been said for 100 years prior. Wow. And what the point that's being made here is that we have no idea what is the mechanism of our inhaled agents. We don't understand what processes these agents, these gases, influence in order to render someone unconscious. And it's an interesting question to wonder why we haven't figured it out yet.
Yeah.
And when we talk about Western medicine and its contributions, we have made phenomenal contributions. I would suggest that most of these contributions are made in the field of surgery, because that's something that clearly benefits humanity. Think about all of the people who would have died from appendicitis, or people who would be walking around with malformed arms their whole life because they broke their elbow when they were 12. And we can fix it, but you can't do any of these things without modern anesthesia, and we still don't know how it works. Now, the first public demonstration of anesthesia was given right here, where you and I reside, not so far from here at Massachusetts General Hospital, in the heart of Boston. And they have preserved that space where anesthesia in the form of ether was first publicly demonstrated. Wow. And what happened was a dentist by the name of William G. Morton rendered a young patient unconscious using ether. And a surgeon removed a tumor from his neck. And the patient awoke and was asked, did you have any recollection of what happened? Do you have any pain? Was there any discomfort? And the patient said no. And half the people in the room who were watching from the stands wept. They cried. They were surgeons. And they had hardened themselves to a career spent cutting into people as they heard their agonizing screams. And to see that this could be done mercifully was astounding. And here we are, 180 years later, and we still don't know how it works. Now, if you may, I don't know if you want me to keep going with this.
Please.
Well, we have to first look at things very closely. And when we say that we know how something works in medicine, this is the Western paradigm. And what that means is it is based in a philosophical concept called materialism, which means that all there is material, and everything, all phenomenon, is a product of matter interacting with itself. And this leads us to the paradigm, which is, well, our physical bodies must be the source of our awareness. How else could it be? On the other hand, I'm sure your audience is sort of, challenging that to begin with, but that's what doctors believe. That's what Western science believes. It has to come from the body. All of our other physical processes are defined by molecules interacting with molecules. So, but if you try to go and find out how does this gas given in 1 part per 50 make you unconscious, you have to look to where the gas interacts with the body, and it interacts everywhere. It messes with the lipid membranes of your cells. It affects protein synthesis. It ends up in the fat. It ends up everywhere. So what's going on exactly? And this leads us to a problem, which is maybe consciousness comes from the entire body, from every single, molecule. It's emerging from there. But on the other hand, as in our deconstructive model, we can look at the activity of someone's body when they're aware and when they're not aware. And it's been proposed that there are a couple of centers in the prefrontal cortex or the brainstem that are the source of our awareness. But let's just be very, very clear here. We can do a thought experiment. If we start looking at those particular structures more and more closely, all we're going to find are molecules interacting with other molecules. Now, is it possible, honestly, that we're going to be able to find the awareness molecule where the presence of it means that we're aware and the absence of it means we're unconscious? How could that possibly be? We're talking about a multisensorial experience. How could that ever be presented materially? And what I'm saying here, and I'm not the first person to say this, but maybe these structures are active when you're aware and inactive when you're not aware. In other words, they don't necessarily give rise to awareness, but when they're active, people are aware. In other words, could consciousness be non-local? Now, you don't have to look far to see that that possibility is very powerful and probably correct, because we have, in our experience, at least in the operating room, documented situations where people are clinically dead. They went into cardiac arrest and we cannot resuscitate them. And we try and nothing succeeds. And then, all of a sudden, boom, they come back. And every once in a while, there's someone who said, "Oh yeah, I was aware the whole time." And we say, "How is that possible? You had no blood pressure, you had no heart rate, um, there was no signs of awareness." And they said, "No, I saw the whole thing from above." And then they recount everything that was done. So right away, we have a problem because our paradigm of a material body giving rise to awareness has an exception, and many exceptions like this. Moreover, we cannot say that these people who, I'm describing a near-death experience, of course, we can't say that they made it up, or this was sort of conjured up by a brain that was firing randomly and they put together some kind of story. No, they had an accurate account of what happened. So, that is a very, very big wrinkle that we cannot ignore. And the reason why this is so important is that when we tie our existence to a finite material body, then there's always the fear of termination or the end of life that's going to be with us the whole time. Because if this is all we have, this is all we have. And this, at a very deep level, defines how we live, how we use our money, how we treat other people. Do we cooperate and volunteer our efforts and resources all the time, or are we trying to get a bigger piece of the pie because that's what everybody else is doing? Moreover, if we know we're going to die and we're sure that's what's going to happen, and by die, I mean, we all physically die, but if that is the end, that is a very good way to control people. Because if you're unafraid and you realize that this particular lifetime or this incarnation is going to come to an end, but consciousness and awareness continues, that introduces an element of fearlessness into the population. And a fearless population is extremely difficult to control. So, I'll leave it at that. And my point here is that I believe there has been a very, very long history of how shall we say, authorities or higher ups to reinforce the idea that, yeah, when you die, you're gone. That's it. There's no more. The idea of an afterlife, sure, you can believe that in your church, but let's be real here. Scientists know that that's not the case. But it may very well be that that is the case. And it is very important to consider this as we live every single day and minute of the rest of our lives.
Well, the thing is, as you mentioned, there are just so many, many reports of people just with reincarnation and stuff, and children coming into the world and like completely regurgitating like a whole life and certain scenarios that like actually happened. And it's just like, come on, like that's a coincidence? Like this kid making it up? The kid can't even read. Like what, like there's just so much evidence out there that something is going on. But I got a deeper question for you. If our body, our cells are intelligent individually and literally remember things and store information, and when we go unconscious for whatever reason it is, we get knocked out or surgery or whatever, and our consciousness, there is still an awareness that remains, even though our consciousness itself is checked out for the moment. And therefore, whatever happens is being stored by our cells, even though we might not remember it until we regain consciousness. Why do you think that would happen? Why would that mechanism happen? Why do we not consciously remember? You know what I mean? Like, what would be the purpose of that?
Well, I certainly believe that our brains and our awareness and whatever it is we are is merciful at times. Will so that you cannot recount horrible memories over and over again. There must be, some sort of, thankfully, some kind of circuit that gets blocked so that we're not torturing ourselves with terrible memories.
Yeah.
But it is absolutely certain that inhaled agents, as well as other agents like IV drugs, can create amnesia, temporary amnesia. We do it all
Yep.
the time.
Yep.
And so, this is going to so what happens when you're unconscious during surgery, if you're
Yep.
saying that awareness is continuous? Well, it's continuous and you could maybe not remember it, or your awareness has left your body during
Oh,
the periods of surgery under anesthesia. And this is sort of if a tree falls in the woods and there's no one there to hear it, doesn't make a
yeah.
sound, right? And if your awareness is not in your body, then whatever happens to your body is sort of outside of who you really are. Like you don't have any access to what happened. But your question is deep, and I don't have a good answer. I mean, it's an unknown, and
Right.
I think it's better to embrace the uncertainty around this than to jump to some conclusion as to what it must be, because that's the only sensible thing to believe, because these are huge implications from how you proceed from here.
See, what I think about is like dissociation with like extreme trauma. Like, let's say that little child that's, God forbid, something horrible happening, and they completely disassociate from their body, and
Hmm.
as a way of surviving. It's a survival mechanism. But whatever trauma happened to their little body is their cells remember that. And then this can present itself later as an illness, cancer, emotional issues, whatever. The famous book, The Body Keeps the Score. I've talked about
Hmm.
it on the show. I mean, so I guess what we're getting at here, and, I realize it's kind of like the big unknown, but just for fun, thinking about, all right, so the memories are in the cells though. Like even though there's some kind of detachment happening, your body is still experienced it. And then if we want to really heal and be whole and aligned and all that, I guess we got to go in there and excavate it so we can heal it. But then it's hard to heal when we don't have consciousness of it. You see where I'm going with that?
Uh, yes, I do, and it's a very subtle thing that you're talking about.
Yeah.
First of all, there's the trauma that occurs to a young child and they dissociate, or even to adults, or you just you're looking down at your body after a terrible accident and you just
Yeah.
don't feel anything. I think it's again a merciful gift from our creator,
Yeah.
or the
Yeah.
one that happens. Um, Now, with regards to what happens during a surgery compared to physical trauma that is dissociated from as a child, let's say, I believe there's a difference, and this is the gift of anesthesia, is that it allows awareness uh, to leave temporarily and come back, and there may be, in fact, some score that's kept by the body during surgery. I don't know the answer to that question, but I don't see that, people who've had multiple surgeries, they don't walk around with some like, oh my gosh, someone ripped me open 6 times for my appendicitis and tonsils and gallbladder. I don't see that. So there's something different about a body that's under a inhaled anesthetic at the
Wow.
appropriate levels.
That's
I don't know what it
so
is, but that's
interesting.
what we can tell.
So you're actually thinking that forgive me for my ignorance, but the awareness actually leaves the body when you're having these things done. Like, is this synonymous in your opinion with your soul? Like, I mean, what do you mean your awareness leaves your body?
Well, I would equate awareness and the soul.
You
I
would.
think your
Okay.
soul is, yes, continuously aware. That is, if you wanted to, identify with something, I would identify with that.
Yeah.
Um, and, we can easily say that in this paradigm, your awareness has entered your body at birth and is having this experience with all of its biases and trials and tribulations and victories and joy.
Yeah.
And but I do want to say something about what you brought up there was reincarnation, because the evidence of that is even more profound than near-death experiences.
Okay.
And you alluded to children who remember past lives, and there's the work of Ian Stevenson from the University of Virginia, who was the chair of psychiatry for I think a dozen years, and he possibly is the world's greatest expert, if you will, or compiler of information of cases of reincarnation. And as you mentioned, Amy, these are not, middle-aged people who say that they were Cleopatra in a previous life. These are children. From the moment they start talking about rather mundane past lives. And the most amazing thing about his research is that he has 3,000 cases where he's been able to put the child back into contact with the actual family from which the child died from in a previous life. And these children are able to identify everybody in the family and recall and recount experiences that can be only verified by their spouse or their widowed spouse. Now, so it could all be bunk, right? I mean, this is one researcher, but other researchers have also documented this as well. Or it could be real. And the reality is we don't know. I mean, we really can't know because there is no physical mechanism by which to which we can point and say, oh, this is the mechanism of reincarnation. Because we're talking about awareness, we're talking about something that's metaphysical, that is continuous and jumps from here and there, from one lifetime to the other. But the interesting point here is this, which is given the fact that we don't know for sure, how do you want to behave? What is your working model of what's going on? Because the model you choose has enormous, enormous implications as to how you live your life and how we live life collectively. And if I were to go so far as to say, I would say every advanced civilization, and of course, I don't know how your audience feels about this, but I think there's civilizations out there, lots of them, if you will. Every advanced civilization will eventually come to understand that they're reincarnating. This is a crucial step. Of course, this is my opinion, right? We're just having ideas being exchanged. Every civilization, every advanced civilization will eventually come to the realization that they're reincarnating. And the reason why this is a big step in their evolution is that they will finally be able to see that all of the horrible things that happened in the past, in their history, that was them. And then all the choices that they're going to make right now are going to affect them, not their children or grandchildren. Now you will have a civilization, if they can come to this collective understanding, that will make decisions much more differently. I mean, we are stuck with, a 10-year time frame, a 5-year, a 4-year, or a 2-year time frame. That's our horizon as to when we start talking about the benefits or detriments from our actions. Imagine the kinds of decisions we would make when we were looking at 100 years ahead, or 1,000 years ahead, or 1,000,000 years ahead. What would we do? And unless we come to this understanding, we cannot move forward. And I believe that's what happens to all advanced civilizations. They will come to understand, like, holy cow, how long are we going to go in circles, tormenting each other generation after generation, and having sort of an identity that is attached to this body, its skin color and ethnicity, when we keep, repeating the cycle, playing different roles. Anyway, given the fact we don't know, why don't we adopt this perspective and make better decisions?
Well, I think you can hit the nail on the head. I mean, the bottom line is if the pervasive cultural belief is that there is no reincarnation, the powers that be have taught us, or let's just say told us that there is, it's going to only lead itself to people being self-centered and thinking about the now, and not being, because nothing's going to, the chicken isn't going to come home to roost. It's not going to come back on me. So it's this terrible perpetual cycle of just nearsightedness and selfishness So if we start to think, wait a minute, there's something like called karma, and God knows I don't want to come back as a frog, so I better get myself together. It's a whole different paradigm that's so important. But I think one of the most important, I've learned so many things from studying your work, so many things. Some of the key words that really stuck out for me, almost like as a synopsis for your work, is these are things that were required to really live a conscious, responsible, loving, good life, really. Curiosity, open-mindedness, objectivity, humbleness, and an unrelenting search for truth. Those were some of the things that kept coming up as I was going through your unbelievable body of work here, this book, Woke, which I mentioned in the intro, and obviously we're going to get more into. But those things, curiosity, open-mindedness, objectivity, humbleness, and an unrelenting search for the truth were kind of the consistent things that kept coming out for me in your book. Would you like to speak to any of that?
Those are well chosen words, Amy. And I would suggest that they're all deeply connected.
Yeah.
Because, I've thought about this a lot, like, how do you instill curiosity in someone?
Right.
And I don't know the answer to that question. There is one possible answer, which is trauma and suffering.
Yeah.
Once you suffer enough, you start to get curious as to why, what is going on here? Like, how far should I look? But in general, there's many different ways to suspend curiosity, and the best way is fear. And that nobody's really curious when you're afraid.
Wow, I never thought of that. That's true.
Yeah, you just want an answer quickly, like, how do I make this end? But curiosity leads to an undying search for the truth. I believe that's what how you said it. And then when you pursue that, then enters humility.
Yes, there's more we don't know than what we do know. That's so key, right? It would just to keep that in mind, humbleness.
Yes, the humility is absolutely key,
Yeah.
because unless you have the humility of knowing that you cannot know for sure, then yes, and this leads to, I believe the fourth thing you said was objectivity.
Open-mindedness, objectivity. Yep.
Yes, because if you don't know, then why not consider all possibilities? And that is what I'm approaching in the first third of the book, is what gets in our way of our objectivity. And it's a different kind of book.
Fear, like you mentioned, fear. Like, so can you speak to that? Because it seems like, there's just so much misinformation going on. I know you've spoken it at length. You're probably sick of talking about it, but I just would love to share this with my audience, for us to all come in with an open mind, regardless of what our beliefs are in any stance. And of course, I want you to also speak about the difference between believing something and knowing something, in opinion, which seems to be very convoluted these days. But, when we're afraid and we're emotional and we get attached to what we think is true, and I believe in my core that most people are good people, and maybe misinformed or not informed at all and thinking they are, or whatever. And that's a whole nother discussion. But, I think everything we talked about, being curious, open-minded, objective, and humble, all goes right out the window when we think we know the answer. And regardless of what side you're on, on any subject, right? And we could talk about the really touchy things going on in the world right now. Regardless, all those things are gone when you really think, but I'm right. So how do we pull that apart to get to come to the table together and talk and be, address things with, because I would hope at the end of the day, we do all have the same goal, is to live in peace and harmony, to be able to be who we are and all that we can be. And I personally think live and let live. I guess maybe others don't. But then it gets very convoluted because they think, yeah, but how you're living is going to affect me. That whole debacle with the supposed getting the shot for grandma and all that, and how that was completely bunk. You know what I'm saying? So it gets tricky because it's like, well, I'm going to let you live, but if you affect me, then I am going to affect how you live. So, but that could be based in a misconception. So, gosh, how do we untangle all this?
Well, you said a lot there, Amy. Let
I
me
know.
see.
Sorry. I just
No,
kind of
okay.
went on and on, but my
Well,
goodness.
no, 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 no. It's a convoluted thing, and things
Yeah.
move very quickly as we try to even define what the tanglement is exactly. Um, I would begin by saying this. First of all, we learn by story. I mean,
Okay.
we are generally that's what really, brings our attention. It's like, oh, it's a story. What's going to happen next? Um, and so I'm going to answer the question in the form of a story, my own
Okay.
story. Um, and uh, it began like this. So, I was sitting there for years, giving anesthesia, and I finally paid back all my debts and got married, had a child, living in a house, and living a very, very happy life. And my wife and I used to watch NPR and listen to NPR and, play the games and do the crossword puzzles on New York Times, in the New York Times, and felt that we were in the know and were living life correctly. And we also had a very powerful spiritual practice. And anyway, then one day, my wife in 2017 shows me a video, and she says, "Honey, look at this. This never made any sense to me." And I watched a video of what looked like some sort of hotel in Las Vegas being blown up. And I said, "What is this?" And she said, "This is a building that went down on September 11th, 2001, 9/11." And I looked at it, and it wasn't a twin tower. This was an enormous building that wasn't one of the twin towers. And I said, "This is impossible. How come we didn't know about this?" Anyway, this building is called the Solomon Brothers Building, also known as World Trade Center 7. And it is a very, very large building. And it has roughly the same amount of floor space as the Prudential does here in Boston. It wasn't as tall, but it was 47 stories and wider than a twin tower. It would have been the highest building, the tallest building in like 23 states. But it was in Manhattan. It was next to the Twin Towers, so it was dwarfed by these two much bigger structures. Anyway, the point is that this building came down quickly. It was not hit by a plane, and it fell at about 95% the rate of gravity, which means
Just
all
went.
of the hundreds of
Yep.
thousands of steel put up no resistance to the fall, zero resistance. What this means is if you were standing atop the building 7, 400 and some feet in the air, maybe a little bit taller than that, actually, 500 some feet in the air, and right when the building started to fall, you dropped your phone off the side, you would hit the ground a split second after your phone did. That's how fast the building fell. There's nothing holding it up. And the most important part, perhaps, is that it fell completely symmetrically. It didn't fall to one side or the other. It went straight down. And I looked at this and I said, this is astounding. And instead of going to the internet to see what people said about it, I went straight to the official story. And here we're talking about a very, very controversial topic, which is 9/11. And I hope your audience out there will stick with us for a moment, or at least a couple minutes, as I expand upon this issue. And I went to the official explanation, which has been provided to us by a group called the National Institute for Standards and Technology, which is a branch of the United States Department of Commerce. And they were tasked to explaining what happened, not just to that building, but to the Twin Towers as well. Now, unlike most people, and I would bank that most of the people listening to us right now have never read what the official explanation was. They just know what someone else told them what the official explanation is. But so, I'm not some special kind of person. I just was, what was the word you use? Intensely curious about the truth. So I read it. And what is amazing to me is that they offer a hypothesis, which doesn't make any sense because they said that basically there was a failure in one of the columns, column 79 on one floor, and that led to a universal complete collapse of the building. And taken as it stands, it doesn't make any sense. And so the question is, how did they prove it? And they said that they did prove it. They built a computer model of the building, and they put in all of the parameters, all of the tolerances, and they hit go. And what happened next? Well, I'll tell you what didn't happen next. It didn't fall like what we saw. It fell to one side and only partially collapsed. And what this means, independent of what your belief system is, what this means is they have proved their own hypothesis wrong. That is what that means. If I were to prove their hypothesis wrong, I would build a computer model and test their theory and see how the model behaved. That's what they actually did. They were wrong, yet they said that their hypothesis was right. And so right there, that's a complete disconnect. It's like, how could that be? So I didn't know really how to wrap my head around what was going on, but I had friends in engineering, people who have PhDs in mathematics and engineering, mechanical engineers, and I said, look, let's talk about this building. I'm very stunned to see that this is the explanation. Did you know that they created a model that didn't work? And they were amused that I was asking questions, but as soon as they realized that I was seriously questioning the official explanation, suddenly their minds went blank. They couldn't hear me anymore. And suddenly, it's like everything closed. And even though I was making very, very simple arguments, we can prove to an 11th grade physics class that the official story is wrong. It's very simple. Everything just shut down. And they said, oh, you've been listening to conspiracy theory videos on YouTube. And I have to be very honest with you. I didn't even know what a conspiracy theory was back then in 2017. And I said, who cares what video? I'm just saying this is basic kinematics we're talking about. How could this possibly happen? And so that's when I realized what kind of problem we were actually in.
Wow.
It didn't matter what the evidence was. We are dealing with a collective unconsciousness about very, very powerful and big things.
Yep.
And that is what led to the book, because what I tried to do here is identify what are the impediments. We talked about fear being an impediment to objectivity, but the problem is that we have things called biases, and biases are prejudgments. They're prejudices. In other words, you assume something before you actually know what's going on, and it is not easy or even possible for a mind to recognize that it's biased. It is like asking someone to see their own blind spots. It's an impossible task. So what I've tried to do here is, again, using vignettes and telling hopefully interesting stories in the book, demonstrate what are the conditions that give rise to biases. And that's what I believe is different about my approach to this. And, this is what we see all the time when we're trying to talk to our friends or family that have different opinions about very, very sensitive issues. You mentioned the vaccine, the COVID-19 vaccine and the pandemic response and those measures. That obviously was a very, very big tragedy. And there are very strong opposing opinions there. But with regard to 9/11, I just couldn't believe that people who should know better couldn't see what was right in front of them. So it is biases that keep us entrenched in our ruts of improper thinking. And you may not know what your biases are, but one thing for sure is if you shut down inquiry very quickly, one should ask yourself why that is. Here's an example. Have you looked at both sides of the story?
Yeah.
Right? Like if you haven't, That's a problem. That means at some point you came to some conclusion that said, going down this rabbit hole is not worth it. It can't be true. Why did you stop? One example is can you argue the opposing position's argument coherently and cite all the proper information? We are under the impression that we know what the other side is saying because our side has told us what the other side is saying, but that's not the same thing as listening to what the other side has to say. So, and I would suggest one of the biggest biases when it comes to confronting these kinds of enormous issues that are contentious is when the credibility of the conclusion determines the credibility of the evidence that supports it. In other words, if the conclusion itself is not credible to you, then all the evidence that I present to you that confirms or proves that conclusion, you throw away because
you dismiss it. Yeah.
You dismiss it because you can't believe what it concludes. But this is not being objective because here you're putting the cart in front of the horse. You don't throw away evidence based on foregone conclusions. You throw away conclusions if the evidence doesn't support it. So all the people who say, oh, no, there was a lab leak, that's impossible, or 9/11 was an inside job, that's impossible. You are actually not being objective because you can't believe it, so you throw away the evidence. You can believe that if you want to, but please don't call it objectivity or everybody knows. So anyway, that is how, really 75% of the book is to prep the reader and to open their minds before talking about the real evidence behind the supposed collapse of the buildings on 9/11 in Manhattan.
Well, that's why this book is such a service to humanity, because you pull it all back before we go there, before we go into these very hot button triggering topics and talk about, wait a minute, let's talk a little bit of psychology here, kind of how the mind works, how we all work, how human beings crave certainty and, knowing, and, biases were probably put into our being for a legitimate reason, which would protect us from being killed, and being we learn from mistakes, and therefore we have a preconceived expectation that's going to happen because this is what happened last time, so you develop a bias because it's self-preservation. So that can be a good thing. But a lot of people, we're not even aware we have biases, and we could pull it back even further. We're not even aware that I've heard it estimated something crazy like 70% of what we believe or what we think isn't even originally from us. Like the things
absolutely.
It's programming, and when I've talked about it on my shows, where do you get your beliefs? Oh, because you were taught that in school when you were 2, or you were parents, or, Catholic school, Sunday school, but how do you, how your beliefs, are they even really yours, and why? And then another step would be, and most people don't even question them. It's and I love that you do. How do you know that that's true? And you just mentioned something might be improbable, but that's different from being impossible.
That's right. Yeah. Well, once again, Amy, you've dropped a lot of lovely morsels to chew on. And I don't mean to hit 9/11 over and over like a dead horse, but I believe this is the pivotal moment in humanity, because it is obvious that those buildings were blown up, and it is obvious that our media, all legacy media, covered it up. There was not a single question, no coverage of legitimate critiques from structural engineers, and there are thousands and thousands of structural and engineers and architects.
Didn't hear about it. No one's heard about it. And that's part of the problem too, is they think, well, if there was dissent, we'd hear about it. And I'll just throw in too, let's look at the fact that there was no plane wreckage at the Pentagon. There's no plane wreckage. There's no bodies. There's no, what's it called? Fuselage or whatever.
Fuselage. Yes, there's literally, we can talk about this for 3 hours and talk about how absurd the official story is. But the point I wanted to make, which is what you brought up, is impossibility versus improbability.
Yep.
And we are very quick to miss the distinction between the two, because generally, when you start um, talking about 9/11 and the possibility of a inside job or a controlled demolition or things like this, people immediately say, "Oh, that's impossible. Too many people involved. Someone would have said something."
Yep.
That's true. But no, that's not true. It's not impossible. It is improbable.
Yep.
There's a huge difference between something that's impossible and something that's improbable. I mean, mathematically speaking, it's an infinite difference. Because the probability of something impossible happening is zero, and the probability of something improbable happening is non-zero. Anyway, not to get into the weeds, the point here is that it is there are impossibilities that have to do with the collapse of these buildings. In fact, this has to do with basic laws of motion. If you think that the top building crushed the bottom part of the building, Newton, 450 years ago, showed you that for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. If the bottom part of the building is getting crushed, so must the top. They're made of the same stuff. So it couldn't have fallen that way. The entire story is complete bunk. Anyway, see, my point here is that the story that the top crushed the bottom,
Yep.
that's impossible. Zero probability of that. The possibility that the media was in on it and there were lots of people that gained, and that's why they fooled us for this long, improbable, in the conventional perspective, not impossible. The Manhattan Project, which is the effort to build the first atomic bomb, that was an enormous project. Yes, it was happening in Los Alamos in the middle of nowhere, but there were people from all over the country that were used to produce the raw materials, the uranium and all of the cylinders and all of these things. This was an enormous operation, and Vice President Truman didn't know anything about it until he took office the morning after FDR died. So the idea that you can't hide something really big from important people, we've proven it wrong there. So that's something to keep in mind. And
Great
this is
point.
why I feel very certain of my position about this, because I happen to believe that you cannot violate the third law of motion. Otherwise, you'd have to give up your entire understanding of the universe, or at least our understanding of the universe. Anyway, so that's that. Here's an important point that you brought up earlier, which is the difference between believing and knowing. And so I'm going to give you another story because we're very quick. Just look, we jump from improbability to impossibility. We jump from believing to knowing. And there's a difference because believing comes, as you said, with some uncertainty, because where did you get it from? You're believing somebody else who could be wrong. That element of uncertainty is vitally important because that's what drives our curiosity. Without uncertainty, why look any further? So in 2012, the National Science Foundation did a survey of the American people, and one of the questions was, do you think that the Earth goes around the sun, or do you think that the sun goes around the Earth every day, right? So hopefully we all know the answer to that question. The Earth goes around the sun, and the Earth spins, which is what gives us the day and night, right? I hope we all know that. Um, Guess how many people got it wrong? One in four got it wrong.
Yeah.
One in four people
Yeah,
thought
there
that
was
they
a
woke up in the
bunch.
morning and the sun, went around. All the stars go around the Earth. We're in the middle of the universe. Um, it's embarrassing, right? But that's America. Now, if you
It's
were
even
among
worse.
75% that knows the right answer, how would you prove it to the other 25%?
Right.
Without,
Yeah.
referring to somebody else? It's like, oh, well, this smart person said this, or NASA says this, or we have this picture. Really? You have a picture
Yeah.
from space? How did we figure it out before there were cameras in space? We've known this for, over 4 centuries.
In this day and age, how do you know the picture's even real? That's
Right.
a whole
So,
nother thing.
and I'm not suggesting that, the Earth is the center of the universe. I am pointing out the fact that if you can't prove it,
Yes.
then you actually believe it. You don't know it.
You don't know it.
Right. And so like you have to sit in your body with that because there is a different feeling that comes with knowing that
Yes.
doesn't come with believing. And we have substituted the two, and that leads to a huge problem, which is that we don't recognize the uncertainty in our position. And if you really think about it, there are very, very few things that you know, because how else can you know something unless you have a personal experience with it? Either you've seen it, witnessed it, or felt it. Most of the things, as you said, we don't actually have any direct experience of. We just believe it. We're
Yeah.
walking around with this idea of how this all works. So most of what we're getting from is from the media. Without the news, without legacy media or whatever you listen to, you have no idea what's happening on the other side of town, let alone what's happening on the other side of the world. So we are taking information and we are granting it I would suggest, unfounded legitimacy. And I'm
Yes.
not saying that everything they're saying is wrong. I'm just saying that you don't know for sure. And this is why 9/11 is so important, because once you understand that, because we don't really know what happened to those buildings, but what we know for sure is that the media did not tell us the truth.
Mhm.
Like venerated media platforms like the Times and NPR and the Washington Post, like I'm naming sort of liberal, left-leaning, intellectual bastions of journalism, but they were in on it, or at least they were instructed not to offer
Mhm.
any critique to what was happened, because understanding what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic is very, very difficult. It really is really hard because there's so many uncertainties. How many people understand what a furin cleavage site is, or what vaccine efficacy is? Does anyone really know? I mean, like, of course
Or
people know.
mRNA, DNA,
Yes.
changing microbiome type, messing up. Like, I mean, all the chemistry and biology of it is just people, the layperson has no clue.
They have no clue, and I'm not blaming them. I have a tremendous amount of compassion
Of
for the layperson.
course.
The point
Yeah.
is,
I mean, it's not our
it's not
field.
easy. It's not
Mm.
easy to prove to a layperson that
Yeah.
it was a lab leak at the very least, and the vaccines were never proven to be safe and effective. And there are going to be a tremendous amount of adverse events from it. You can't prove it to someone who can't understand all of these things, but you can see very clearly that we were lied to about 9/11.
But there's a lot of parallels there on what's happening with the COVID thing. I mean, for me, it's like we neither have had knowledge nor consent. And all this stuff is happening. It's the same as like chemtrails and all these things that are like these nefarious under the cover situations. People aren't aware. We don't know this is going on. Now, you could argue that they're intentionally distracting us to look over there at the pink tiger rather than what they're doing over there. And,
Mhm.
and the thing that gets me really tricky that I find I struggle with is a couple of things is that it seems like you can't play a game with your opponent playing the same game with different rules, and we
Right.
can't assume that everyone has the same value set and people have integrity and they tell the truth. And like we're back to our initial discussion about karma and things coming full circle and comes around, goes around, and the golden rule, do unto others as you'd have them do. I mean, not everyone believes that way. That's very clear. So how do we navigate in this shit show? Had a lack of a better scientific term.
Well, the first thing I would say is, yes, we can't expect everyone to think the same way. And just from talking to you, I would suggest that you're on the leading edge. Um, you know, People who are pushing what's really going on, like, looking very, very deeply into these things and
Just
challenging everything.
questioning. Like I sorry to interrupt, but back when the whole thing started, I wasn't even allowed to question with even my personal circles. Like I got completely attacked, and I'm like, wait a minute, something is very wrong here because it made. And I wanted to ask you about that, not to jump ahead, but put a pen in it that a lot of it is people. It makes them so uncomfortable to go there. That's why they don't. So we got to
Yeah,
address
that's
that
of
because
course.
they can't handle it. I literally get the hand with some people like, nope, I don't want to hear it. It's too
Yeah.
uncomfortable for them.
Well, they have the right not to know if they
Of
don't want
course.
to.
But it's
But my
like,
point here
wow,
is that,
okay.
you're on the leading edge. and but my interest is in the trailing edge.
Okay.
I believe that if we want to exert some true transformational change on the planet, we have to nurture the curiosity of those who are just starting to open their eyes.
I love that.
This means that we have to be careful with what kind of information we share. Like, where is the conversation going? Um, it is, for example, not easy um, for someone who has accepted this mRNA therapy twice, three, or four times to consider the possibility that, this may have been a mistake for you. Why would you want to go there? Right. So
Yeah.
I believe that in order to make real change on the planet, we have to approach this with compassion
Yes.
and know who we're talking to. And without that, we can't, we really are stuck. Now, so like, how do you bring this up? Well, um, beyond that, ask the simple question. What, let's say you're going to believe the COVIDian narrative that's coming from the CDC. And you ask someone like, why do you believe that? It's like, well, because they're the experts. This is the Center
Yes.
for Disease Control and Prevention. And I said, well, there are other experts that disagree, people who know more than you. Okay, so what do you do when experts disagree? Now we have a portal into getting deeper into how they're thinking about things, because this is not a conscious kind of problem we're having. We're having a subconscious problem. Like, what's driving you to go with the CDC and not, you know, uh, thousands now of other physicians and scientists saying, whoa, we kind of made a really big mistake.
But they don't
Yeah.
hear those consent.
Right. So
That's the
but
problem. They're censored. They don't hear the opposing side, so they don't even think it's happening.
yes. But I'm saying, like, if we're talking to someone one-on-one, you say, look, here is, here's Harvey Reich from Yale, probably one of the world's greatest epidemiologists who disagrees with the CDC. How do you know he's wrong? And if they're being objective, they will have to say, well, I don't know that he's wrong.
Mhm.
Okay. And so if you're actually looking at the problem objectively, knowing that you cannot know as much as these opposing experts, you would look at this and say, holy cow, we have two groups that are mirror images of each other. I don't know what the science says. I don't even know how to understand the science, but one group is saying that the other group is lying to you,
Hmm.
that the other group is falling for stupid ideas. They're overly gullible, and because of it, they're dangerous.
Yes.
Both sides are saying that. There is only one difference between the two. One is pleading for a debate.
Yes.
The other is saying, no, 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 we're not going to talk about it. We're right, and you don't get a chance to explain yourself or ask us any questions. Now, that doesn't mean that the ones who want to debate are right. That doesn't mean that they're right. But notice that if the people who are running the country and the CDC and all those people are saying we can't have a debate, how would they ever know they were wrong? They could be wrong for a very, very long time. And if you believe them, you could be wrong for a very, very long time. So at some point, this is going to register with someone who has, this is the people at the trailing edge I'm trying to bring along. It's like, look at the fact that this is going to be the outcome. The people are looking for a debate. Maybe you can prove them wrong, and then they'll have corrected. But if you're not looking to have an exchange, then you could be stuck in the wrong belief system for a very, very long time. And this, of course, translates to everything else we're talking about here. Like, if you're, putting it off because you're like, oh, I'm uncomfortable with where that leads.
Yep.
Okay, that's fine. But you could be wrong for a very long time.
And
And the
suffer
reality is, Amy, is that, what we're
unnecessarily.
talking about here is often misconstrued as some sort of dystopian, world we live on, and we're all screwed and there's no hope. No, 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 no.
Yeah.
This is actually a message of hope, because we
Sure.
could be identifying the very things that have kept us entrenched in a place of, inability to prosper. ill health,
Mm-hmm.
many different things. There could be solutions, and the other side is just saying, "Oh, well, that's just the way it is," because there are psychopaths out there, and there are
Mm-hmm.
bloodthirsty people out there that are trying to kill you, and it's
Mm-hmm.
it's capitalism, so that's the way it works. That's actually not how it works at all, and that's what we have to offer here.
And I love how in your book you pointed out, which I never really realized consciously before, that apparently throughout history, it's the small minority of, let's just say, lack of a better term, dissenters or people with a different opinion that are the ones that eventually turn the ship. It's not the majority what the consensus believes. It's always things get course corrected, usually, by the small minority of people like the Sir Isaac Newton and the Galileo and all your wonderful examples in the book, and how they were the heretics and they were imprisoned and all this stuff and ostracized. But come to find out, eventually they were proven right. And that's what makes me think, to your point about the censorship, about how one side doesn't even want to have a debate, doesn't even want to come to the table. And it's like, you got to ask yourself, and this is one of the main things I learned from you, Madhava, was that I know you've heard this before, you don't tell people what to think. It's more about asking the questions to get us to think for ourselves. And that's just it's such a brilliant gift that you've given humanity. And I thank you for that. You've taught me a lot personally. And like I said in the beginning, it's very difficult because we get passionate and we get emotional and we want to help people. And it's like, oh my God, don't you see? You want to shake people. It's like, how are you not seeing what's right in front of your face? And maybe the cognitive dissonance, it's too uncomfortable, like we talked about, and that's okay. Everybody's going to walk their own pace. But it's very hard when you see someone going 100 miles an hour at a wall and it's coming and you're like, no, please put on the gas or put the brake.
Yeah.
But my point is that we don't censor people, that the truth will eventually win out. And if someone is talking bunk and it's a bunch of BS, it'll eventually show out. So what do you care if they go ahead and blabble on, because it's not true and it'll prove itself to be not true. It doesn't threaten you. But it's only somebody who's threatened that needs to silence someone else. That's the way I would think of it. Otherwise, who cares? Let them talk all they want. The truth will show itself in the end.
Yes. Well, people who have conversations and are putting forth ideas like we are a threat to them.
Yeah.
It is very, very difficult to go to sleep at night saying, "Holy cow, Al Qaeda didn't pull off 9/11. It was someone who had access to the buildings and
Yeah.
someone with the ability to turn off or shut down cameras in front of the Pentagon. It was someone who had access to extremely energetic military grade or higher explosives."
And to
Now you're
control
living in a really scary world.
and control our defense, how all the planes were taught to stand down. I mean, there were no fighter jets protecting the Capitol and the Pentagon. I mean, it's just, endless things of cascade of all the people that would have been involved, which, like, as you said, is kind of hard to imagine. But it creates such an uncomfortableness in all of us that really what could be happening. So, and I know we're getting toward the end here, but I really want to drill home the message of hope and optimism and what we can do. Because one thing also I've learned is that, there's two types of consent. There's active and passive consent. And doing nothing and biting your tongue when your gut and your soul is telling you something isn't right is a form of passive consent. And consent can lead to problems. So I just hope everybody doesn't abandon their own soul and speaks truth, or at least questions like, gosh, this seems odd or funny, or, I don't know. I mean, how do we have courage to do that? How do we have courage to go against the grain and speak what we think is true?
Well, that's a good question. First of all, you have to have the curiosity.
Yeah.
To look harder. And the main thrust of what I'm trying to put forth in the book is there's something beyond cognitive knowing, which I would call intuition. And it is very, very and I would say impossible to access intuition if you're biased, either through
Yes.
fear or through, these other biases that we've talked about. If you're biased, then you can't get to intuition because intuition sits or is self-emergent once you have a clear mind. That was the idea behind the Buddha, and why the book is called Woke. Now that I maybe should have named it something different, but that's what uh, that's what the Buddha said when people came up to him, and his peace was radiant, and they said, "Who are you? What are you?" And he said, "I'm awake."
Mhm.
And what he's saying here is that a mind that is free of delusion suffers less. And so in order to get to your intuitive sensibilities, you have to first recognize that you're biased. And
Yeah.
whether that's like, look at the number of biases that go into, I don't want to hear about that.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're automatically assuming that what I'm going to tell you is going to be bad for you. You are already assuming that there's no hope in the message. You're already assuming that for those reasons I cannot be right without even, investigating. So it's these things occur in our cognitive mind very quickly, and it is not easy for the average person, especially in today's world where we're bombarded with information. We're just getting stuff all the time to have the metacognition to see how your mind is working. Like, how do you come from one conclusion to another? I believe that's why it's so difficult. But in other words, in order to address the trailing edge, which is what my purpose here is to perhaps offer some advice to get people who are at the trailing edge. And by the trailing edge, I'm not necessarily talking about the ones who are like, oh, I want to hear about it, don't tell me. The ones that are sort of like, scratching their head. How do you bring them along without pushing them away? Because that would
Yeah.
be, destructive.
Right.
And what I like to say is this. I liken it to being on a boat, and you don't have an oar, but everybody else has an oar, and you want to get to the other side, but everybody is sort of splashing around unpurposefully, and the boat is going in circles. And how do you address the oarsmen? They're like they have minds of children. They don't, or they're disagreeing about which way to go. And you're like, look, let's just go this way. And they continue to go in circles. Do you scream at them? Do you get out the whip? Or do you ask them nicely? And then suddenly you hear rapids, and you look down the river and you see that you're going to go over a waterfall. Now, what do you do? How do you address these people? And I would suggest this. I don't know what works. It works, what works for some people may not work for other people. But I would suggest that before deciding on how to approach the issue, which is this is the kind of issue we're in right now, as you said, like heading toward a brick wall, someone hit the brakes. It's like we're heading towards the waterfall. We need to get across.
Yeah.
What do you do? I think, and I believe in my heart that you have to be willing to go over the waterfall with them and still love them.
Ooh.
Once you have that in your heart,
Yeah.
then choose how you want to address them. You can
Wow.
do whatever you want to, but you have to be willing to do that first.
Wow.
And in order to be the most effective in conveying information or ideas or tidbits that will get people to embody their intuition.
Oh, so beautiful, so powerful. I love that. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to really meditate on that. And wow, it's so true. And, for me, what I'll just share with the audience and with you, what I try to do is focus on what we have in common. And like I mentioned earlier, I mean, most people that are in my close circle, we're trying to be good people. We just want to be happy. We want to love and, just be respectful and all that. So if we try to bring it back to, okay, at the end of the day, we both kind of want the same things. Let's try to come together with why you're navigating that way to get there and I'm navigating this way, and just focus on the similarities and the common goal. I mean, not, trust me, I've had conversations that are far from perfect, but that's what I try to do,
Well, we're often, I know you want to close up here, but
Yeah, oh
we're
no.
often in agreement with the people we're arguing with,
Yeah,
95%.
yeah,
And usually what the issue is, like we see the world kind of the same way, it's like these are terrible things that are happening and we need to do something. But the challenge is, I see it that this is happening by design.
mm,
And they see it as, no, this is just sort of,
life. Yeah.
it's come out of human nature and it can't be changed. And, my point here is that if it's by design, we can change it. We can find out who the perpetrators are. We can find out, what's really behind all of this.
There's hope.
There's hope. We can fix it. And we agreed about all the phenomena for the most part. Like that, yeah, this is happening, but why? And this is why this is a message of hope. And
Yes.
and we can sort of sit with the fact that we see it the same way, at least.
And I've mentioned several times how unbelievably powerful your book is and how you personally taught me so much in this book.
Wow.
And I got a confession. You know, I think what I realized in your book too, and I'm just going to say, and I might not be alone in this, in that I hate this. I hate this whole, sides thing. But my certain beliefs, I don't know, but my certain beliefs based on my research of where things stand, I think you and I are in alignment on most of these things. It sure sounds like it from your book. I'm like, yes, yes, yes. But based on my research, I have been guilty of the same thing that I'm accusing the others that don't agree with my beliefs of doing. And you made me realize, like, wait a minute, I'm going in with a bias. Just like that side would dismiss that side by saying, oh, conspiracy theory. As soon as they hear that, even the whole 9/11 thing, we probably lost a lot of people because as soon as they heard that, they're like, I'm out of here. But you know what?
Right.
That's okay. That's not my audience. But that's not our job. We're not here to, I know you, I'm speaking for you, but jump in and correct me. But I believe you don't want to tell people what to believe. You've mentioned in your book, you want to hopefully help them, as I do, open their mind and consider questions that will lead them ultimately to where they want to go anyway. Because we have to question what we believe, because as you said, there's a difference between believing and knowing. So how do we know what we know and believe what we believe? And we got to know the difference. But my point is, my confession is that I didn't even realize, Madhava, that I was doing what I was accusing the other side of doing, like just dismissing because I believed I was right. Like, no, based on my research and my evidence, this is happening. Like, so I've had to pull it back and be a little more humble and be more patient and listen and all that, be open-minded. It's not easy.
It's not easy.
Not
And
easy.
this is, here's another pearl. Maybe I
Yeah,
want to include. Okay.
please.
Which is this. It is important, as you pointed out, like suddenly you realize that you were doing the same thing.
Yeah.
It is very important to consider, as you're holding a belief, and good for you for recognizing belief versus knowing. As you're holding this belief and you're nurturing it and you're so confident in it, ask yourself, what would it take for you to drop the belief?
Oh.
What would you need to hear? Like, what would it take? Right? And I would suggest that
Good question.
many of the things, for example, so if we, once again, 9/11, sorry, people, if you're still here, good for you. 9/11, I can offer probably 500 things to someone who believes a conventional story to say, would it change your mind if you knew this or knew this or
Yep.
knew this, right? Many, many things. And maybe none of them will suffice, but there's many things to offer. On the other hand, I would say this, what would make me change my mind about 9/11? Show me an example where Newton's third law is violated. Show me an example of how a human body can undergo crush injuries from a falling building and end up in 200 separate pieces. This was an explosive event. Explain to me how bone fragments can be found a fifth of a mile away from ground zero. If you can offer me another example where this happens without explosives, then maybe I'll go along
Oh,
with that.
wow.
Okay, so I'm open.
Yes.
but you're going to have to find some pretty powerful evidence to convince me
That's a
that I'm
good
wrong.
point.
And I would suggest for most people who believe in the conventional story, you know what that piece of evidence would be? The New York Times admitted that it was an inside job.
Which will
Once
never
the
happen.
New York Times says, yeah, you know what, those buildings were blown up. It was probably not Al Qaeda because they didn't have access to the buildings and they didn't have access to the explosives, and we need to do like a thorough investigation. Tell me how many people who disagree with us about 9/11 would say, oh no, that can't be right.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
still believe in the conventional story. No, this is the power that the media has over our collective consciousness. We have,
Mm-hmm.
given them the power to dictate what is and what isn't. And that is a very, very scary prospect when we know that the managing directors of these platforms, are following a narrative. They have a
Yeah.
tremendous amount to lose by veering off into conspiracy territory.
Well, it's just a fact that it's like six outlets control all of the narrative of the world.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Information has been consolidated in the hands of people who are very
Yeah.
powerful. But
Yeah.
again, the point is like notice if if the Washington Post came out and said that Fauci needs to be tried for his misdirection and
Yeah.
knowing the detrimental effects of this, and he can still continue to push it in 6-month-old, and he needs to be tried,
Yeah.
you would believe it then, right? I mean, not you, but I'm just
Yeah.
saying
Yeah.
the conventional people, like all of
Yeah.
my colleagues in medicine,
Yeah.
like I've been trying to plant seeds for the last
Yeah.
2.5 years. Like, can you look at this? That's what they're waiting for. They're waiting for the Washington Post to say it.
See, but what's that all about? Why are they waiting for the supposed authority? Like to me, that feels like okay, they're waiting for daddy's permission to think a different way. Like, why can't they think for themselves and look at the old? I don't get that.
It's another can of worms. I've come from institutionalized medicine and engineering, and I understand how people think there's some very, very bright people there.
Yeah.
But many, many people who have degrees, have letters after the name like I do,
Yeah.
have been able to successfully, complete their education by following the rules,
Yeah.
and by following what these institutions tell them to.
Mm.
And we have groupthink. It's an odd sort of position that challenges what's coming from, the left-leaning media, especially in Massachusetts. Maybe in elsewhere, it's different. So there's a bias towards that. And so it just feels better to be in a group of smart people that all believe the same thing. Um,
Okay, so as we kind of land this plane, sorry for the analogy there, given our discussion, you mentioned how ultimately you decide which model to subscribe to. There is no, quote, right choice, and there is no certainties. Therein lies the beauty of reality. You always have the freedom to choose. However, in order to choose, you must first see that you have a choice to begin with. Is this worth considering as a possibility? What might you lose by looking further? How does that compare with what might be lost if you don't? So, what I have in my notes here is yes, we have a choice. It starts with all of us remembering that we have a choice of what we believe, and it comes down to using that freedom. And you make a point of really paying attention as to where you're sourcing your information. We have to learn from others and get some beliefs from other people because we can't possibly know everything. So it only makes sense in a human life that we're going to have to get beliefs from other people at some point because we don't know everything about everything, right? So we have to be very mindful and conscientious of where we get our information because that's going to choose what we believe, and also be very conscious and mindful that where we're getting that information is going to have an implied trust. So trusting the source is paramount. You have to make sure that source is trustworthy, that you're giving them your trust, which is then going to shape your beliefs, which will then shape your behaviors and shape your life outcome. I got that from your book. Powerful, powerful, powerful.
yeah, well, yeah. I'm glad I put it that way. I have to say that like you said, you're getting information from other people, but we don't know if they're trustworthy. The
Yeah.
point is to recognize that your belief system is based in trust.
Yep.
And that is what was completely sort of spun around and distorted during the pandemic, with
Yeah.
trust science.
Yeah.
Scientists don't trust the science. That's why we trust them, is because they don't trust it. It's like they're saying there's uncertainty. Every scientist that comes with a new discovery assumes and recognizes that it's going to be overturned eventually. And so the point here is that, like you said, your belief system is based on what other people tell you almost entirely. But realize that your ideas are based in trust. It's a belief.
Okay.
It should be open to refinement or a complete upheaval. And if you
Yep.
don't want to do that, then you could be stuck for a very long time.
Ultimately, it comes back to our intuition, right? Our connection with our own soul wisdom and knowledge. I never heard anyone say that your book said that I'm paraphrasing, please correct me if I got it wrong, but you said something to the effect of you don't really subscribe to the idea of following your gut instinct or even following your heart as a good resource for following your intuition. Can you please expand on that? So, because a big part of my show is helping us follow our intuition.
Well, what I'm offering here, I don't know. I'm just suggesting, this is my take on it,
Yep.
is that there are a lot of people who are so-called intuitives,
Yep.
uh, and they say, oh, it's my intuition. Um, I, I think that's wonderful, but you have to be able to recognize where your biases are in your cognitive mind first. um, because the cognitive mind is extremely powerful. That's what's behind hypnosis. Like if I told you a story about, walking down on a beautiful sunny morning from your bedroom, opening up the refrigerator door and finding a beautiful, ripe yellow lemon, and you pull it out and you sniff it and you can smell it. It is loaded with juice. And you get out a knife and you cut into it and you see it spray up in the sunlight, like all of this juice. And then you take a big chunk of it and bite into it. Notice that you're salivating. That's the power of the mind. So when you say, oh, I feel it here, your mind also could be playing a role in this. So you have to
Wow.
understand that your mind is playing a role in this. So you just
Wow.
can't necessarily go to the gut before examining your mind first, which is not very easy for us to do because we don't practice it. And that's something that I think should be a part of our lives, is a contemplative practice. I do what's called Vipassana, which is what the Buddha taught 2,500 years ago. But you got to slow down.
Can you tell us just briefly what that entails, the practice you do?
This
Is
is a
this type of
phenomenal practice.
meditation or?
Well, Amy, we're very lucky because, just a few dozen miles from us, about 60 or 70 miles out west in Shelburne Falls, is one of the Vipassana centers started by a guy by the name of Satyanarayan Goenka, who was in the direct lineage of the Buddha all the way through, orally and written and practice-wise, and ended up, he was born into a Burmese family. He's Indian, but, grew up in Burma. Anyway, he is a teacher of a study of Vipassana, and Vipassana is what the Buddha offered to people who came to him, princes and paupers alike, 2,500 years ago, and said, "Oh my goodness, Guru, could you please tell us what you know?" And the Buddha reportedly said, "Well, of course, I'm happy to teach you, but you have to give me 10 of your days and do exactly what I tell you to do." And he would take people into his area and feed them and teach them for 10 days. And this precise practice, what he taught for 60 years, is what is being taught at Shelburne Falls. It's been transmitted orally over 2,500 years. So that's the background. And the point here is, as a student of this, I really am not authorized to, give you any teachings, but it has to do with cultivating focus on
Yeah.
your bodily sensations, not just, scanning it, but like, spend 3 days just paying attention to this part of your face. What comes up? Go back to it. Focus more. Look, go after the most subtle thing that you can feel. Stay with that and keep searching for the more and more subtle things. And
Wow.
anyway, it's training of your attention.
Okay. Yeah.
To your body. And, I believe that this is completely connected to, people who, intuitives. I feel it. I feel it. It's like, that's great. And this is a very important and, helpful practice. Spend 11 days just focusing in on your entire body. Like what
Wow.
right now, what is your left elbow saying? Do you sense anything there, or are you ignoring it? You're just watching the screen. So what happens when you start scanning, and what happens when you do this continuously? That is the practice.
So brilliant. It's such a perfect way to end the show, because this show is Awakening Aphrodite, which is a big part of my mission, is to reconnect us to our body, our connection to our very selves, and how we live our lives, most of us, from the neck up, and
Yeah.
reconnecting, because the feminine is the body. So that's the whole premise of the show. That's so perfect. And I love leaving everybody with a tangible, actionable, doable, positive, effective homework. Thank you. Oh my goodness. Okay. Before you tell us where we can find this amazing book, those of you watching, I know it's getting dark where I am. I apologize, I don't have my lights on, but on YouTube, Fit Amy TV, Awakening Aphrodite podcast, this amazing book, Woke. You see all my gazillions of notes in here. Before you tell us where we could find more of you, any final thoughts that would just help you feel complete with today's conversation?
Thank you for the opportunity to be here and to close this out. We had a very heady conversation, but I would suggest that we have been given minds that cannot know completely, but we've been given hearts that can love completely. And that is the way to approach what's coming for us in the next few years or a few months.
Beautiful. Everybody, thank you for joining us today. I hope you really enjoyed our discussion, and let's remember to be curious, to be open-minded, to be humble, to have courage, and an unrelenting search for the truth. And paraphrasing my new friend, Madhava Setty, Dr. Setty. Okay, where can we find more of you?
Thank you for letting me share. So the book you can get on Amazon if you would like to contribute to Jeff Bezos's scrawny fortune,
Yes.
or you can order it from my publisher on my website, madhavasettymd.com. I have since spent a lot of time procuring and writing on my Substack, which is called An Insult to Intuition. MadhavaSettySubstack.com. There's about 4 dozen, I think, very, very important articles that talk about issues like this. And I was once the senior science editor for Children's Health Defense. This is Bobby Kennedy's organization. I am no longer, but you can find a lot of my critique of the pandemic response and my efforts to explain complicated data there on the Defender, which is the online publication of Children's Health Defense.
Fantastic. And we will have that in the show notes for everybody. In case you're driving or busy and can't take that down, just hit up those show notes, and then you can follow links and find all that wonderful information. Everybody, I really hope you get this book, Woke, and it's thought-provoking, it's timely, it's just very, very, very important for all of our growth and evolution, and to really help land this plane, get this thing done. So thank you so much again, Dr. Setty. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching. And this has just been a phenomenal conversation. And I personally thank you for teaching me so much and helping me be a much better person.
Well, it's been an honor to be with you, and thank you for all of the thoughtful questions and this lovely conversation. I thank you for what you're doing, because what's the point of a interesting idea if there's no one there to spread it? So, Amy, I appreciate it.
You got it. Well, we're on the same team. How's that?
Yay.
I think everybody listening and watching are too. So let's do this thing, everybody. Okay, we'll see you next time on Awakening Aphrodite. Would you like to support my mission to help empower people all over the world to be all of who they truly are? If so, please subscribe to the show, leave a review on iTunes, and share it with a friend. And if you're looking to take immediate action to align your energy and optimize your health, visit amyfournier.com. Thanks for listening to Awakening Aphrodite. Let's awaken her together in you. I'm your hostess, Amy Fournier, and I already can't wait to be with you again and for you to hear what I have planned for the next show.
Thanks for listening to Awakening Aphrodite with Amy Fournier. To learn more about Amy, check out her website, amyfournier.com. That's amyfournier.com. You can also check out Amy's live and on-demand virtual fitness and yoga classes, and sign up for her newsletter to receive a free mini ebook of 3 of her top tips for making holistic health a lifestyle. Again, that's amyfournier.com, and get your ebook sent to your email immediately. Connect with Amy on the daily on Instagram at FitAmyTV, FITAMYTV, and watch many of the podcast episodes and subtopic clips on her YouTube channel, which is also Fit Amy TV. Enjoy, and we'll see you next time on Awakening Aphrodite.